The carriage carrying Lady Isabella Harrington jostled over the rutted road as dawn crept across the countryside, its pale light revealing the wavering line between summer's remnants and autumn's first chill. Inside, Isabella sat rigidly upright, gloved fingers clasped tightly in her lap, her usually lively expression tempered by the humiliating rumors that had followed her from London to the remote estate of Cold Ducky Manor. Even the coachman, thinking her unable to hear him, had murmured to a passing rider that the Duke of Ashwick had dismissed more potential brides than some men met in a lifetime. Each careless word had settled upon her shoulders like a fresh layer of doubt, and she felt the silent weight of her family's expectations pressing harder than the confines of the carriage walls. She had always spoken boldly, sometimes too boldly, and society had punished her by branding her difficult, though she believed honesty no sin at all. Yet as the manor's dark outline rose from the mist, she wondered whether her candor would be the very trait that doomed the fragile hope her parents held for a secure union. Cold Ducky Manor loomed larger as the carriage approached the gates, its venerable stone facade untouched by sentiment and framed by climbing ivy that clung like ancient secrets. Footmen stepped forward to assist her, their practiced bows polite but curious, and she sensed that her arrival had already sparked whispering among them. Isabella descended with measured grace, reminding herself that dignity was often a woman's only armor, and that she must rely on her wits to navigate whatever reception awaited within. A steward escorted her through the echoing halls, where portraits of stern ancestors observed her passage with unblinking disdain, as though questioning her worth before a single word had been exchanged. She had known noble households her entire life, but something about Ashwick's ancestral seat felt colder, less forgiving, as though its stones had been shaped by discipline rather than affection. Still, she lifted her chin, determined not to be cowed by walls or whispers or the formidable man she was summoned to meet. The Duke awaited her in a high-ceilinged drawing room, his posture immaculate, his expression unreadable beneath the measured restraint that society admired in him. Sebastian Everly seemed carved from the very marble surrounding them, his presence striking not for flamboyance but for the precision of his movements and the calm authority that emanated from him. Isabella curtsied with impeccable form, offering a courteous greeting that he returned with only the faintest inclination of the head. His eyes, cool and analytical, studied her as though she were a curiosity rather than a guest whose future might soon intertwine with his. For a moment, she felt the defiant impulse to speak freely simply to disrupt his composure. Yet she held her tongue, aware that first impressions could shape fates more swiftly than truth or merit. Still, silence did nothing to soften the tension settling between them, and she sensed that the Duke had already formed an opinion she was not likely to alter. Attempting to fill the charged quiet, Isabella commented on the estate's extensive grounds, noting improvements that could benefit the tenants, but the Duke's expression tightened with each passing suggestion. His responses, though civil, carried an undertone of irritation, as if her observations trespassed upon territory reserved exclusively for him. When she corrected an imprecise statement made by the steward, Sebastian's gaze sharpened, and he dismissed the man before addressing her directly. The pause before he spoke stretched long enough for Isabella to feel her heartbeat quicken, though she forced herself to meet his gaze unflinchingly. She had expected formality, perhaps skepticism, but she had not expected judgment delivered with such stark finality. "You are not bride material, Lady Isabella," he said, each word deliberate and devoid of malice, as though stating a fact no more emotional than the time of day. "Leave by dawn." The pronouncement struck her like a physical blow, though she refused to reveal the sting. Instead, she inclined her head with measured grace, offering no protest or plea, and allowed the steward to escort her to the guest chamber prepared for her brief stay. Behind her composed facade, humiliation burned hot, twisting with a fury she dared not display. She had been rejected swiftly before any true acquaintance could form, condemned by reputation and a few moments of honest speech, and she wondered how many other women had been dismissed by a man so evidently wedded to control. In the solitude of her room, The moonless sky pressing against the windows, she let her shoulders sag as the enormity of the insult settled upon her. Yet humiliation alone did not fill the silence. From the corridor beyond her door, Isabella heard the Duke's voice, low, curt, speaking to his advisor. A wife would be a liability, especially one with opinions. The words slid beneath her skin, igniting not despair but a sharp, rising determination that surprised even her. If he intended to send her away diminished, he had gravely misjudged the woman he believed unworthy of the title he refused to share. For as she stood at the window, her reflection faintly illuminated by a single wavering candle, Isabella realized that dawn would not merely bring departure. It would bring purpose, and the beginnings of a conflict neither she nor the Duke yet understood. Isabella did not leave by dawn. She stood in the library instead, hands clasped behind her to disguise her trembling, waiting for the Duke with the calm resolve of a woman determined to reclaim what little dignity remained to her. The manor was hushed at this hour, its corridors still heavy with the scent of extinguished candles and polished wood, but the library breathed with a quiet life of its own. Sunlight crept across the spines of leather-bound volumes, gilded titles shimmering like whispered judgments. She had not come to plead. She had come to understand the man who dismissed her so swiftly, and to ensure he understood that her departure would not be the simple erasure he seemed to expect. When Sebastian entered moments later, his expression tightened, not with anger, but with clear frustration that she had the audacity to confront him after the humiliation he had issued the night before. He demanded to know why she remained, and she replied with measured restraint, explaining that no well-bred woman could vanish into the countryside without clarifying her intentions. Her tone held nothing of desperation. Rather, it conveyed a self-possession that unsettled him more than tears or pleas ever could. She then shifted the conversation to his estate, noting observed deficiencies in the tenant cottages and suggesting improvements that aligned with responsible stewardship. Sebastian's irritation flared as he interpreted her concern as intrusion. Yet beneath the sharp exchange lay something more complex. A reluctant acknowledgement of her perceptiveness and an unwilling fascination he did not wish to feel. Their argument rose with startling speed, words clashing with the intensity of two wills long accustomed to resistance. When Isabella refused to cease speaking despite his rigid command, he stepped closer, intending to silence her with authority. Yet the moment he reached for her arm, something ungoverned overtook him. His mouth met hers, not with tenderness, not even with deliberation, but with a fierce, unthinking impulse born of frustration, pride, and the inexplicable magnetism her defiance awakened in him. Isabella froze, breath caught between shock and bewildering awareness. The kiss was brief, a moment of fire swiftly extinguished, but neither could pretend it had not altered the air between them. Sebastian stepped back as though burned, eyes widened in disbelief at his own transgression, while Isabella touched her lips with equal parts indignation and confusion. No apology followed, no explanation either. They stood suspended in a silence thick with unspoken emotion until a startled gasp from the doorway snapped their attention outward. A young maid, having witnessed far too much, scrambled away in horror of what she had seen. Isabella knew instantly what such a sight could become within the walls of an estate ruled by servants' tongues. Sebastian swore under his breath, a rare fracture in his composure, then turned sharply, as if distance might restore his lost control. Isabella, suddenly aware of how precariously her reputation balanced upon the moment, retreated into her thoughts, her pulse unsteady. She had come seeking clarity. Instead, she had been drawn into something volatile, something that neither propriety nor reason could easily contain. The impropriety of the kiss would not remain private, and she understood all too well the consequences a whispered scandal could inflict upon an unmarried woman already viewed with suspicion by society's gentler circles. By midday, the manor vibrated with rumor. Isabella sensed glances lingering too long, hushed voices trailing behind her as she moved through the corridors. She debated leaving at once, yet the notion of retreat felt too much like surrender. Meanwhile, Sebastian wrestled with a disquiet he attempted to smother beneath administrative duties. His thoughts returned repeatedly to the moment in a library, to the inexplicable loss of restraint, to the warmth he had never intended to seek. Anger warred with a dawning awareness he refused to name. He intended to avoid her, yet found himself seeking her presence in passing corridors, catching himself listening for her voice, and resenting the vulnerability she stirred within him. Late that afternoon, a footman delivered a parcel to Isabella's chamber. Inside lay a beautifully bound botanical field journal, its worn leather cover etched with delicate engravings of wildflowers. It was not new, but clearly treasured, its margins filled with meticulous annotations by someone who valued knowledge as deeply as she did. A single page bore a pressed violet, an unspoken offering of apology or perhaps recognition. The gesture unsettled her more profoundly than the kiss. A book, especially one of personal significance, carried meaning in their world. It suggested thoughtfulness, attention, even respect. She traced the violet's fragile outline, wondering what impulse had compelled the Duke to share something so intimate after recoiling from his own reckless desire. Yet even this quiet moment of reflection could not dispel the unrest brewing beyond her chamber. As dusk settled, a servant hurried down the corridor carrying a folded newspaper freshly arrived from London. Isabella overheard snatches of excited commentary. The Duke's name, her own, mention of a mysterious lady at Cold Ducky Manor. She stepped into the hall just as the paper was opened, revealing a small but unmistakable article implying that the Duke of Ashwick had taken interest in a spirited young woman presently residing at his estate. Her stomach tightened. The story was vague, but vague was enough to ignite speculation, and speculation was enough to blacken reputations. Sebastian, upon hearing of the publication, strode through the manor with long, purposeful steps, jaw clenched, eyes dark with a storm gathering just beneath the surface. He had expected to control his household, his future, his public image, yet one impulsive moment now threatened to undo the rigid order he lived by. Isabella felt the tension before he reached her door, sensed the weight of the confrontation approaching. The air between them, once merely strained, now quivered with something deeper, part apprehension, part longing, part battle neither knew how to abandon. When he appeared in her doorway, the fading light outlining his frame, he seemed a man caught between two fates. Isabella met his gaze steadily, though her pulse quickened. The silence that settled between them felt perilous, charged with the sharp edge of truth neither could yet articulate. And in that final suspended moment, just before he spoke, she realized that whatever he said next would draw them irrevocably toward conflict, or toward something far more dangerous. Sebastian closed the door behind him with a quiet finality, as though sealing them away from the echoes of gossip that prowled the manor's corridors. Isabella stood near the window, the fading light casting her in soft amber, yet her expression was composed with the dignity of a woman refusing to be diminished by rumor or regret. He regarded her with a tension that seemed to vibrate through him, a man accustomed to controlled equilibrium now wrestling with the consequences of a momentary lapse. She did not retreat, nor offer courtesy. Instead, she asked the question that had haunted her since morning, whether he intended to deny the rumor or silence it. Her voice held no tremor, though she suspected he might still wish to send her away. His answer, however, came low and taut, admitting that he could not abide falsehoods. Yet truth itself was more dangerous in this instance than fabrication. Her presence, he confessed, had become unexpectedly complicated. Isabella absorbed his words with a blend of caution and curiosity. She sensed an unspoken struggle beneath the surface, a fracture in the armor he wore so rigidly he seemed unaware of its weight. Pressing further, she asked why he recoiled so violently from the idea of marriage, why her mere presence unsettled him. His eyes darkened, not with anger, but with something far more guarded. He spoke of duty, expectation, and the ruins of his father's reputation, structures of responsibility that had shaped his life since boyhood. Yet when she pressed gently about the past scandal she had glimpsed through whispered accounts, he stiffened, as though the memory itself carried barbs. Finally, with visible reluctance, he revealed the truth. Years earlier, a false implication of impropriety with a married countess had threatened to destroy his honor. Though the accusation was disproven, the stain had lingered, teaching him that affection, or even the semblance of it, could devastate a man's standing. Since then, he had vowed never to again allow desire to govern his actions. His confession softened something within Isabella, yet she did not rush to comfort him. Instead, she acknowledged the cost of such restraint, recognizing how deeply it had carved itself into his manner. She then offered her own truth, that she feared losing herself in a marriage that permitted no voice, no purpose, no meaningful contribution. The world expected her to be decorative, obedient, and silent, even when silence cost the well-being of others. Her candor, so often chastised, was the only protection she possessed against becoming invisible. She admitted that the kiss, reckless and unbidden, had unsettled her not simply because of impropriety, but because it had awakened a stirring she could not entirely dismiss. That she felt anything at all for a man who sought to dismiss her both frightened and intrigued her. Sebastian listened with a stillness she had not expected, his expression unreadable yet undeniably attentive. The tension in the room shifted from confrontation to something far more intimate, though neither dared name it. Seeking air, he proposed a walk in the gardens, and she agreed, sensing that movement might unbind the heaviness between them. They stepped into the cool evening, where lanterns flickered along gravel paths and the faint scent of late-blooming roses drifted on the breeze. The world beyond the manor felt softer, as though nature itself offered them a temporary refuge from expectation and scandal. Their conversation unfolded with unusual ease as they walked beneath arched trellises. Isabella spoke of her fascination with botany, her desire to study the natural world with the same seriousness afforded to scholars. Sebastian admitted he had read sections of the botanical journal he gifted her, drawn in by her annotations and the clarity of her observations. The revelation startled her. She had not realized he possessed such capacity for quiet attention. They shared small details, habits, preferences, memories of childhood, that revealed more than either intended. There were moments when they brushed shoulders, when their steps fell into unintentional harmony, when silence carried a warmth that words could not. Yet the fragile peace was tinged with restraint. When Isabella paused beside a fountain, illuminated by lantern light, she sensed him hesitate before stepping closer. His voice, usually so steady, softened as he confessed that her presence challenged him in ways he had not anticipated. She felt her breath catch as he reached for her hand, then stopped himself, withdrawing as though burned by his own longing. He whispered that he must not risk what little control he possessed, though every instinct urged otherwise. The raw honesty in his tone struck her with equal parts tenderness and ache. As if conjured by fate, the rumble of carriage wheels intruded upon the moment. Both turned toward the manor, where a familiar crest gleamed on the arriving conveyance. Isabella's heart lurched as recognition dawned. Her mother had come, summoned no doubt by whispers reaching London faster than propriety could contain them. Anxiety tightened her chest, for she knew precisely why her mother would appear unannounced, to remove her before scandal fully took root. Sebastian's expression hardened with a mix of surprise and something dangerously close to regret. Isabella stepped back, instinctively bracing for the confrontation awaiting her inside. She thanked him for the walk, her voice steady though her thoughts churned with bitter uncertainty. He inclined his head, but the look in his eyes held a silent plea she did not yet understand. The spell of their fragile intimacy unraveled with the opening of the carriage door, revealing her mother's furious silhouette framed by the manor's lantern glow. And as Isabella moved toward her fate, She felt the echo of Sebastian's halted confession linger like a promise suspended in air, one that neither propriety nor fear could entirely extinguish. Isabella's departure from Cold Ducky Manor unfolded with the quiet efficiency of a retreat rather than an escape, yet every moment carried the sting of a severed possibility. Her mother ushered her into the carriage with clipped instructions and a rigid spine, her indignation sharpened by rumors she refused to repeat aloud. Isabella offered no protest. She sensed that any attempt to defend herself would only harden her mother's resolve. As the manor receded behind them, she felt a hollow ache settle in her chest, not born of humiliation, but of an unfinished truth between herself and the Duke. The kiss, the confession, the fleeting tenderness in the lantern-lit garden, each memory pressed upon her with a weight she struggled to contain. By the time they neared London, she had fortified her expression into composed neutrality, privately wondering whether Sebastian would attempt to reach her or allow the chasm between them to widen into permanence. Life in the city resumed with its usual demands, though whispers clung to Isabella's reputation like persistent fog. Ballrooms glimmered with chandeliers and murmured judgments, while carriages lined the cobbled streets beneath a mild winter sky untouched by snow. Isabella attended events with practiced poise, yet her thoughts often drifted toward Ashwick's distant estate. She found herself scanning the entrance of every assembly, half expecting the Duke to appear, though reason insisted he would not. To distract herself, she poured her energies into quiet pursuits, botanical studies, charitable work, and letters to trusted friends. But nothing fully silenced the memory of the man who had rejected her, kissed her, and revealed more vulnerability than she suspected he intended. She wondered whether he regretted that moment beneath the lanterns, or whether he now viewed her absence as a welcome restoration of control. Sebastian, meanwhile, moved through the silent halls of his manor with a disquiet that unsettled his every task. He attended to estate matters with mechanical precision, yet his thoughts returned repeatedly to Isabella's parting silhouette. Her absence transformed Cold Ducky Manor into a place of echoes, where every room held some faint reminder of her. Her laughter in the library, the warmth she brought to the gardens, the fierce intelligence that had challenged his long-held defenses. He attempted to bury himself in correspondence and accounts, but at night he found himself pacing before the fire, replaying her words about purpose and voice. When his sister visited the estate, she found him unusually somber, prompting her to press gently for the truth he had refused to acknowledge even to himself. It was in conversation with his sister that the fragile barrier around his heart finally cracked. She observed that he looked less like a man preserving his reputation and more like one fleeing from his own desires. Her remarks struck with startling clarity, for Sebastian realized he had spent years guarding against affection rather than seeking fulfillment. Isabella, with her unflinching honesty and quiet strength, had stirred a longing he had denied out of fear. The memory of her walking away, shoulders straight, eyes bright with unshed emotion, haunted him with increasing intensity. At last, admitting defeat to himself, he resolved that allowing her to vanish into London society without explanation or effort would be the gravest mistake of his life. Thus, he set out for the city, carrying with him a determination that surprised even his closest confidants. As he arrived at the season's most anticipated assembly, a grand affair hosted by the Earl of Carrington, the ballroom shimmered with music, candlelight, and the restless energy of whispered intrigue. Isabella stood among a cluster of acquaintances, her pale silk gown reflecting the warm glow of the chandeliers. Her composure was faultless, yet her gaze held a subtle melancholy that had settled into her expression since returning from Ashwick. When the murmurs at the entrance intensified, she turned slightly, expecting to see some newly arrived noble. Instead, she saw the unmistakable figure of the Duke of Ashwick striding into the room with purpose etched into every step. The crowd parted instinctively as Sebastian crossed the floor, his gaze fixed solely upon her. Isabella felt the world contract, her breath thinning as he approached with a resolve that felt at once terrifying and impossible to resist. He bowed before her, a gesture executed not with rigid formality, but with sincere humility. The music faded into distant ambience as he lifted his head and addressed her, his voice carrying clearly across the room. He declared that he had been wrong, grievously, foolishly wrong, to judge her as unsuitable, for she possessed not only the qualities of a bride, but of a partner worthy of admiration, respect, and devotion. He confessed that his fears, not her character, had clouded his judgment, and that life without her felt like an expanse of empty corridors echoing with regret. Isabella stood stunned, her heart pounding beneath layers of silk. The ballroom held its breath as Sebastian extended his hand and asked her to marry him, not out of obligation, nor to quell rumor, but because he could no longer imagine a future unshared with her. Emotions surged through her, a tide of bewilderment and relief interwoven with the memory of their fractured beginnings. She searched his eyes for sincerity and found it there, unmasked, unwavering, and warm. With steady grace, she placed her hand in his, and the room erupted into applause that felt like the jubilant conclusion of a story neither of them had dared hope for. Their wedding took place soon after, attended by those who had once whispered doubts, now silenced by the undeniable strength of their bond. As they exchanged vows beneath the vaulted arches of a sunlit church, Isabella felt the world settle into harmonious clarity. Returning to Cold Ducky Manor as husband and wife, they breathed new life into its once somber halls, transforming it into a place of shared laughter, open dialogue, and mutual purpose. And as evening fell upon their first night home, they danced in the warm glow of lamplight, the burdens of their past replaced by the promise of a future forged not by duty, but by love discovered through trial, courage, and surrender.